Life is full of beginnings. It's why we say things like, this is the first day of the rest of our lives, or we talk about starting new chapters, or we begin new seasons of our lives. We take next steps, and every once in a while we realize that we do in fact get fresh starts. So how we start matters. And wouldn't it be great, this morning this conversation is built around one big question. Wouldn't it be great if we could get great at starting strong? Like, wouldn't it be great to be great at starting strong, to be a people who make the very most of our beginnings, to take hold of all the possibilities that come at the start and then relentlessly chase after God's best for us? It's what this series is all about. To talk about launch it's a set of key conversations that are all about the most important journey of our lives. It's our journey with and toward God, the beginning, the middle, and eventually the landing. And can we agree this morning that starting is hard, right? Sometimes we even say things like the first step is the hardest step. But what's even harder than starting is starting strong. And I think what I'm learning along the way is that what makes starting strong harder than just plain starting is that starting strong beginnings aren't always revealed until we get a little bit down the road, right? We don't always know whether or not we're starting strong when we are starting, because we get good at talking a good game right before we start. Or maybe it's that we're starting with explosive intensity, but we're not quite starting strong. We're starting with intensity. I'm talking about actually starting strong. Starting in a way that sets us up for the long haul and then sets us up in the right direction. But sometimes beginnings feel insignificant. Sometimes we look at what we think is a beginning and it's like, how could it be with something so big that I'm chasing after, this big dream? How could it be wrapped up in such a small start, such a small move? And so we think we have to start big to start strong. Some of us might actually think that we're so far off track that there's no real chance for us to get on track at this point. We've made so many decisions that have taken us so far off what we know and what we're learning is the right way. And so some good news, actually some great news before we go any further, is that your next step can be a step in the right direction. Jesus talked a lot about beginnings. Jesus talked a lot about fresh starts. Jesus talked a lot about what it looks like to walk in relationship with God. Jesus talked a lot about what it looks like for us to live our lives in a way that gives glory to God, but is also for our good. And so in the middle of the book of Luke, there's a sermon that Jesus specifically preached to his closest followers. Like, this is Jesus with his disciples and then begins to preach a message that's uniquely crafted for people who are walking closely with him, trying to help them understand the way they should relate to God through Jesus, the way that they should understand the world and how they should experience the things that they're going to experience along the way. But in Luke chapter 6, it's this Jesus sermon specifically to his followers. He says this, "For no good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit, for each tree is known by its own fruit." To do a quick vocabulary lesson, when Jesus says bad fruit, what he means is rotten. So we're not just talking about like this is a non-preferred piece of fruit, like this, like not my favorite thing. I prefer one, but if I call that one bad, I don't like that kind. This is rotten. This is stuff that shows up and it's like, this is not edible in any way. This is rotten, not just bad, not just something that doesn't taste good. This is rotten, useless kind of stuff. And it'd be easy for us to look at it. There's two ways we could look at it. One way is more comfortable for us. One is Jesus is preparing his followers to deal with people who have bad fruit that shows up in their lives. Right? He's like, here's how you can see who aren't good people. Here's how you can see who isn't like a good person, who's an evil person, a person whose fruit is bad in their lives. And it can become this way of looking at others and making sense of who other people are and how they're like set in relationship with God, which is more comfortable for us. Right? Judging other people is a lot more comfortable than looking in the mirror ourselves. Here's the less comfortable one. What about when rotten fruit grows on the trees of our lives. What do we do when we look at our lives and we observe the things that we're doing and the choices that we're making, and we look and we say, that was not good, right? Actually, we're not going to soften it by saying that was not good. That is rotten. What am I going to do with the rotten fruit that shows up in my life? What are you going to do with the rotten fruit that shows up in your lives? How we deal with that question might actually be the thing that breaks us through into a new chapter of our lives. A few weeks ago, I went to the dentist, and I'll just say this is like public confession time for Pastor Nate. It had been a very, very long time since I had gone to the dentist. Here's all my list of excuses. So like a couple decades ago, I had a traumatic dental experience, like super bad, like the kind that my wife was watching happen, and she's like, I don't know if I can go to the dentist again after watching what you just went through, right? Really unpleasant. And so that became my get out of going to the dentist card that I used for like a really long time. So we live life. I go for a couple decades. I take my kids to the dentist, but I don't go to the dentist myself. I go about life. We get here in Spearfish, and it's like this year, I'm like, this is the year for it. This is like new start for Pastor Nate. I'm going to go to the dentist. I'm going to like get over my fears and go to the dentist. So Dr. Jeff, super, super kind. Like this feels like very like a safe kind of deal. So I go to the dentist, and I'm sitting in the chair at the dentist, and I'm rehearsing my excuses. Like I'm gonna have to like open my mouth, and they're gonna know it's been a couple decades probably, right? There's like, all the things. It's like, what are they gonna tell me? I wanna know, like all this kind of stuff. And so go through, I start to rehearse it. It's like, well, we just moved here from Alaska. Haven't really gotten settled 4 years ago, right? I've just been really busy for 4 years, right? It's like all the excuses, as soon as you start to speak them, just sound really, really lame as they it's like, no. Fortunately, I'll just say this, I got away with it. It went super well. I'm really grateful for that. I'm a whole new fresh start in my relationship with dentists now. But as I'm talking with Dr. Jeff, it was really interesting because I said, here's the thing, it's so interesting to me because I'm here and I'm feeling some things like shame and like I should have done something differently, but the longer I waited, the harder it got to like actually like do the right thing and all of those kinds of things. What am I going to hear about? What am I going to find out? I don't want to know about all of this. And so talking with him, and then as we're having this conversation, it's like, Dr. Jeff, we live in the same kind of world, don't we? Where it's interesting how human nature leads us to avoidance. At the dentist, what am I going to find out about that I don't want to know about? What am I going to do? Like there's shame. It's been a while. I don't know. What's happening with all of this? And so to look and say, man, I don't know. Here's what I do know. Dr. Jeff and every other dentist I know would prefer to deal with a cavity before it starts to hurt, right? And I would sure rather walk with you and deal with the fruit when it first emerges before it starts to pile up and pile up and pile up. Sat and talked with a lot of people over the years who there's piles of rotten fruit that there's a lot of heartache that could have been avoided had we dealt with things early on. But Jesus continues. He says, for figs are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor are grapes picked up from a bramble bush. Jesus takes it in so many ways. Like we hear this and it's like, well, it's Jesus, and we sounds good, but it's absurd what he's saying. He's like, of course. Like I have to push this to the most absurd point to help you understand that what you're thinking and how you think you can get away with this is never going to work. He says like, we would never gather figs from thorn bushes. We would never expect to get grapes from a bramble bush. But he's pushing it to the absurd to set up a really important conversation. I'll just say this, if some of us, we are doing the mental gymnastics of trying to figure out how to let ourselves off the hook of this conversation, like we might, like somebody here might be saying like, well, I'm not a tree, so this doesn't actually apply to me. Good. This is a super uncomfortable conversation if it had anything to do with me. You might not be thinking that, but you might be thinking this, a little rotten fruit here or there in my life isn't that big of a deal. Just because something shows up that I know isn't supposed to be, it doesn't make me a bad person. I'm still a good person. Which makes me wonder what Jesus would say about that. Continue. A good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, his mouth speaks. So, principle at play in this conversation that Jesus is having with his disciples, and it's this: start now with the end in mind. Make choices now that lead to the kind of fruit that you want to have that shows up later in your life, right? Start now with the end in mind. The Bible, this is so beautiful. One of my favorite things about the Bible is that it's full of stories of people who have rotten fruit all over the place in their lives, and then Jesus. Jesus can transform a heart that's overflowing with rotten fruit into a heart that bears an abundance of good fruit. It's actually exactly what Jesus came to do, to deal with the rotten stuff, not just to make us feel better about the things that show up occasionally in our lives, but to say, I want to help you deal with the root issues that are leading to the rotten fruit in your life. But we have to be willing to let him do it, right? We have to be willing to allow Jesus to do exactly what it is that he came to do. And so then Jesus, if it went from we're talking like agricultural terms to now we're talking in terms of like human life, now it gets personal. Jesus looks at those who have been walking with him, his disciples, and he asks them a question. He says, why? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I tell you? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I tell you? And it's with this question that any thought that his followers might have had that Jesus was preparing them to deal with rotten fruit in other people's lives goes out the window, and Jesus says, why do you? Why is it that you do this thing? Why is it that you can hear me speak and then still not do what I'm asking you to do? It's actually the age-old question for humanity. It goes back to the very beginning of human history. Some of us this year, we have just started, right? First of all, welcome to 2026. Happy New Year. Some of us have started a read through the Bible in a year plan, which is an incredibly helpful practice. It's so important that we spend time listening to God on a regular basis, but we're working our way through the Bible. So we're like a week or like less than a week through. So if we're doing just the read through the Bible, we're still early in the book of Genesis. And this time around, one of the things that has struck me, and I think maybe because of the series that we're walking through and just lots of conversations with my kids and lots of conversations with people around this idea of launching, is that that God's plan from the very beginning was actually very simple. The relationship that God created humanity with and into was very simple. It was human choice that made it complicated. God literally said, walk with me and don't do this one thing. And then here's some things in terms of caring for what I have created for you, the environment that I've created for you to live in and to enjoy. Take care of it, and let's work together in terms of tending this. But the instructions were really simple. Just don't eat from this one tree. And then walk with me. Live your life in close relationship and in conversation with me. And so it's almost like Jesus bringing a heaven conversation to earth. It's like, I've wondered this from the very beginning of human history. Why? Why would you recognize the authority of God and then not do what he's telling you to do? Like Jesus is bothered by this question. He's bothered by this approach that we take as human beings. And I don't think it's just a critical question from Jesus. I don't think he's just saying, so why do you keep getting it wrong over and over again, and I'm just going to give up on you? I think it's an offer to help. I think it's a diagnostic question. Like, is it hard for you as a human being to hear me clearly? Is it an obedience issue? Like, what's your default response when I speak? Like, help me understand what makes this so difficult when you can acknowledge my authority and then ignore my instructions. Jesus is like, I just don't understand. Help me understand why you operate like this. And so Jesus, with this question, makes it so simple. He says, so here's the roadmap. Listen to what I have to say and then put it into practice in your life. It's simple, but it's not easy. He's speaking, and what happens next is up to the hearers. How will they respond? Jesus says, let me just explain this to you. He says, everyone who comes to me and hears my words and does them, I will show you what he is like. This is like discipleship in its most fundamental form, to hear and obey, to listen to what God has to say and then to follow through, to put it into practice in our lives. So Jesus says, just to make it really clear, I've made it really, really simple, not easy. I've made it simple. Now let me make it very, very clear. Let me give you a story that is going to let you hang on to this. It says, he is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And when a flood arose, the stream broke against that house and could not shake it because it had been well built. It'd be easy to look at that story as a story of endurance. Like, look at this well-built house, this thing that endured through the hard things. But it's really a story of obedience, isn't it? It's like the one who put it into practice and laid the right foundation. And it's a story of starting well. Saying, what is it that I'm going to build my life on? What is it that's at the root of my life and what everything else is resting on in life? Jesus says, but the one who hears and does not do is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. When the stream broke against it, immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great. As Jesus tells this story, recognize that it's really a question of what kind of work do we want to do? Do we want to do foundation building kind of work, or do we want to do cleaning up the rubble after the storm has laid what we have built to waste? Right? What would we prefer to do? Work on the front end to say we want to make sure that we have the right foundation? Or do we just really like cleaning up the rubble in our lives when what we built just keeps getting knocked down over and over and over again? Are we starting? Are we listening to what Jesus has to say and putting it into practice? Are we starting strong? Starting strong starts at the foundation, hearing and obeying God. So Jesus speaks, and God speaks. And there's two responses. There's hear and then something else, right? Hear and delay, or hear and ignore, and make excuses, and whatever you want to call it, it's not obedience, it's disobedience. And in the story, it's interesting that both men do work. Actually, Jesus could have made the story a little more complicated by saying the one who built without a foundation, like really went all in, actually built a more beautiful, like visibly more appealing kind of house, and it still got knocked down. Like you could push it that far. The man does the work. He just doesn't have anything left after the storm to show for it, right? What he built doesn't last. But then there's hear and obey, which is the right response. Jesus says that's like the man who hears, who digs down deep, who builds, and when the storm comes, the house lasts because it's well built. And wouldn't it be incredible for us to hear Jesus look at our lives and describe our lives as well built? There's, I think, two keys to taking hold of this. One is that the storms are coming either way, right? The foundation or lack of a foundation, the strong foundation in the well-built house does not make it so that person is exempt from the storms that come its way. And it's not punishment for not building well that the storms come. The storms come either way. The foundation is what made the difference in the outcome in this story. And two, Jesus doesn't make a distinction between the houses. It's not what is built on top of a foundation or not a foundation. There's no distinction between materials or how they look or how much work went into building them. He points his finger at the problem. He says the problem is at the foundation. It's at the start of the process. Hearing and obeying is the strong foundation. Foundation is not optional. Foundation isn't like some sort of next level for extra spiritual kind of people. It's the foundation. It's what everything else is built on. One more starting strong principle from this story: when it's time to start. Like actually put into practice what God is calling us to do. When we hear God say go, we go. This is Jesus asking the question, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and then not do what I tell you to do? This is Jesus saying, so this is like the person who hears my words and puts them into practice. Not just accumulating words from God, but putting them into practice. When it's time to go. When it's time to start. But here's the thing. Sometimes strong starts don't look like what we expect them to look like. In Zechariah chapter 4, there's a principle that I think is important for us, especially now as we look at the year and we think like big dreams, big goals. We have to make big moves. Don't be discouraged by small beginnings. Centuries before Jesus told the story about the men building their houses, the people of God found themselves in another building project. They were rebuilding the temple where they could worship, where they could connect with God. In many ways, the rebuilding of the temple would mark a new beginning for the people of God. And so during the rebuilding process, God spoke through prophets to encourage and to give instruction to his people. It spoke of the Lord at the beginning and the rebuilding of the temple. And then Zechariah, a voice as the temple is being completed. God's people were working to rebuild the place where they could be close to God. And yet in the rebuilding process, they struggled. They struggled with a lack of supplies. They struggled with a lack of loyalty among the people of God to complete the project. They struggled with a lack of loyalty to God and to each other along the way, that there began to be discouragement that crept in. And that led to division and a frustration with God about the conditions that they were trying to work in, and frustration with each other about the work that seemed to not be going like what they had expected it to go like. And so discouragement did its work, and division began to appear among the people of God. And into that, Zechariah spoke hope. And he reminded them that the only way that they're going to be able to complete the project that's being built is through the power of the Spirit of God. That same Spirit that God used to speak the whole earth into creation. Zechariah 4, starting in verse 8. Then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, the hands of Zerubbabel have laid the foundation of this house. His hands shall also complete it. And then you will know that the Lord of hosts had sent me to you. For whoever has despised the day of small things shall rejoice, and so shall see the plumb line in the hand of Zerubbabel. A big God who's not afraid of small beginnings, right? Because people were looking and they're saying, we used to be. Like when Solomon built the temple, man, that was a temple. And now we're in this season of small things, and we've grown discouraged. And we're frustrated. It doesn't look like what we thought it was going to look like. And so God speaks through Zechariah and says, the ones who lost heart, the ones who were discouraged by these days of small things, they will rejoice, because what God is doing is bigger. It's a smaller start than you think. Don't be discouraged by small beginnings, because the beginning isn't the whole story. The book of Job is a conversation among, we'll call them friends, who are trying to sort out and help Job understand what to do in response to walking through some extraordinarily difficult circumstances in his life. Job had life that seemed like it was going pretty well, and then a whole set of circumstances that led to him being empty-handed and grieving and all sorts of hardship. And he has friends who are speaking into him in this moment, trying to encourage him along the way. And in Job 8, one of his friends is speaking to Job, and he's giving him some advice. And it's interesting because he's speaking, but he's looking. It's like he doesn't even know Job all that well, it feels like. It's because Job was not bearing rotten fruit in his life. But he says this, if you'll seek God and plead with the Almighty for mercy, if you are pure and upright, surely then he will rouse himself for you and restore your rightful habitation. And though your beginning was small, your latter days will be very great. Somehow, even with the problematic elements, the parts where it sounds like what his friend is encouraging Job to do is to work a transactional relationship with God. Like if you will do, and if you will operate in this kind of way, if you will do these things, then God will do for you. And so all of that, it's like God does not work in terms of transactions like that. The assumption that Job is somehow broken is an unfair assessment of Job. But that last piece, and though your beginning was small, your latter days will be very great. Almost 40 chapters later in the book of Job, as his story is coming to a conclusion, and it says this, and the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. The beginning isn't the whole story. How we handle the beginnings in our lives matters. So I don't know this morning what exactly the beginnings are that are playing out in your life. I don't know what beginnings God's going to be inviting you into in the coming days and weeks, or maybe one that you're wrestling with God about right now. I don't know what beginnings look like for you. But I do know how God can help you start strong, to make the very most of the beginnings that show up along the way for us. It could be that it's in whatever the start is, whatever the new beginning is that you're experiencing. Say, I want to begin now with the end in mind. With this new opportunity, with this new day, with this new thing that's opening up in front of me, this new year maybe. I'm going to begin this year with the end in mind. I'm going to start now with the end in mind. Or maybe it's a foundation issue. Hearing and obeying God. We will never start well if we have not heard God's voice. Or we will never start well, we never sustain well without an ongoing connection with God. I don't know if it's an issue of when it's time to start. Like maybe you're like at the starting line or on the launch pad, and it's like, I know what God's asking me to do, I just haven't responded to him. I've been delaying, let's just call it disobedient. When it's time to start. And maybe for some of us, it's that we're looking at beginnings that don't feel nearly big enough. We've got these big dreams, the big expectations of what we want to see God do in our lives, and we're like, how could it be that it's such a small start? Do not despise. Do not despise small beginnings. Do not be discouraged by small beginnings. And whatever the beginning of your story has been up to this point, the beginning is not the whole story. So every day we have an opportunity to start strong. There's 3 simple habits that I think can help us along the way. One is to take time daily to pay attention to the fruit that's emerging in our lives. Say, that was rotten. God, help me deal with this. God, I want to not be a hoarder of rotten fruit. God, when it shows up, I want to ask God to deal with the stuff that shows up in our lives. Say, God, would you help me deal with this? I don't want to be a person whose life is overflowing with rotten fruit. God, would you allow my life? Would you do the work in my life to allow my life to be a life where there is an abundance of good fruit? To pay attention to that daily, to take stock of the choices that we're making, our reactions and responses to things. Habit 2, to daily make time to hear from God and then to put into practice what he's telling you. So I will carve out time daily. I will carve out time to make sure I am listening to the voice of God. Jesus says, so why would you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I say? Is it that I'm not actually listening to what he has to say? Or is it an obedience issue? And it's important for us to carve out time, to make time in our lives to hear from God and to put his words into practice. And then to make a habit out of trusting God with whatever beginnings are presented to you along the way. Whatever invitation to a beginning that God is giving you, whatever invitation to a beginning that God is working to trust him with that. Whether it's big or small, but to say, God, I trust you. God, I trust you with this new beginning. God, I trust you with this opportunity to start. Life is full of beginnings. Wouldn't it be great to be great at starting strong? Because God already has the beginning, the middle, and the end. They're already all in his hands.